Hello, and welcome to Global Policy Forum's video interview series. We are joined today by the Bolivian Ambassador to the United Nations, Pablo Solón. In international climate change negotiations, decision-making is often carried out by a small number of powerful nations, while countries and stakeholders most likely to be severely impacted by climate change are excluded from decision-making. Such diplomacy was apparent at Copenhagen and resulted in unbinding and non-substantive commitments towards tackling this great global problem. In response to the disappointing Copenhagen Accord, Bolivia organised the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth, with the aim of developing a people's agenda for addressing climate change and introducing greater democracy into climate negotiations. Ambassador Solón spoke with us about the circumstances that led to the Cochabamba World People's Conference and about the global power structures of climate governance that have historically hampered democratic decision-making on climate change. Why did Bolivia decide to organise the World People's Conference?
In Copenhagen, we had a great frustration. All the world was expecting an agreement to reduce in a very significant way the greenhouse gas emissions from developed countries. And at the end, we didn't have that, and we had what is called the Copenhagen Accord, that was a text that was tried to impose at 3 a.m. in the morning to 192 countries, while the vast majority didn't participate in the drafting of that text. So President Morales decided that it was necessary to call to the People's World Conference on Climate Change and Mother Earth Rights, because if we want to have a negotiation on climate change that takes into account the concerns of the people have to organize and mobilize itself.
In what way did a powerful minority of states impose the Copenhagen Accord?
In the UN, we are 192 states, and the chart of the UN says that there is no difference between small or large countries. We all have the same rights, but in Copenhagen that didn't happen, because they were the first-class countries that meet together, around 29 of them. They decided what was going to be in the text, and the rest just expected and waited until we receive a text that they told us, you're going to have 60 minutes to analyze, and then we will approve the text.
Why was this decision-making process so exclusive?
The problem is that some countries, because they are very big, they are very powerful in terms of economics and military power, they think that if they come to an agreement, then that's it. The rest are just going to accept it. And that's not true. And I would say this is the main problem that we have faced in the negotiations. And we hope that from now on and until Cancun, we will be able to keep to the rules of multilateralism. We think that in this negotiation, what is being negotiated is very, very important. It's the future of life and the future of humankind. And what we are seeing is that the main interests of corporations, of economical powers, have more weight than the concerns of the people, of nature. This is a huge problem.
Was the Cochabamba World People's Conference a more inclusive process?
The Cochabamba conference was an open conference. We call all social movements, NGO, indigenous people around the world, and everybody that wanted to participate could participate. We also invited the 192 states that are part of the UN, There were around 50 to 60 that were present there with the representatives at different levels. And we wanted to have a representation from all of the regions. We had at the end around 9,000 representatives from outside Bolivia, and in total 35,000 participants in the conference. So you had the possibility for a cross-cutting dialogue between social movements, indigenous people, NGOs, networks, and experts, representatives, ambassadors from different governments, all coming together around one issue that was climate change.
What were the key recommendations of the Cochabamba People's Agreement?
So the conference conclude that it's necessary to fight for a goal of stabilizing the temperature increase in 1 degree Celsius, and that we should maintain the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol is not a perfect international agreement, but what we are seeing now is that some developed countries want to replace the Kyoto Protocol by another kind of agreement that will be a very loose, a very weak agreement, where there will be voluntary pledges of emission reductions and not anymore aggregate targets for emission reductions. So that is why the conference called for the maintenance of the Kyoto Protocol. But it clearly established that the emission reductions in developed countries should be done domestically, not through market mechanism and not through offset mechanism, because we want to see emission reduction really taking place in the countries that have, at this moment, the greatest emissions, and not that they buy, because they have more money, some emissions reduction certificates in order to say that they have accomplished with their tasks. The other key issue has to do with the finance. The People's World Conference clearly said that $100 billion by 2020, that is the proposal of the Copenhagen Accord, is really insignificant. That means around $20 per person in developing countries per year. We think, and the conference expressed, that at least for climate change, the same amount of money and all the budget that now is going to defense, security, and war should go to climate change issues. That is more than 12 times what is being actually proposed.
Recommendations from the People's Agreement have now been included in the new negotiating text for the next major climate conference in Cancun. What has enabled this step towards a more inclusive negotiating process?
This is the result of the recognition that it is impossible to impose a tax to 192 countries. You have to negotiate with them. You cannot follow up the road of Copenhagen. So at the end, the facilitators, the chair of the ad hoc working group on non-cooperative action, assumed that the only way to move forward in a party-driven process like the negotiation of climate change is to really hear the states. That's the only way. It doesn't mean that the proposals of Cochabamba have been already adopted or accepted by all countries, but it means that yes, now we are going to discuss between the different proposals that now are on the table. So I would say this is the result of a great pressure, especially from developing countries, that said, we don't want anymore to come to meetings where there is some document that is elaborated in some small room and then put in front of us. We want to negotiate and draft the new agreement, the new text.
Are there opportunities for developing nations to work together to strengthen their voice in international climate diplomacy?
There is a coalition. That coalition is the G77 plus China. But we need to strengthen that coalition. That is the coalition of all developing countries, in order that our coalition really expresses our voice and the people's voice. That is why when President Morales came to New York to present the conclusions of the Cochabamba conference, he wanted especially to address the G77 plus China meeting, because that is the coalition that we want to reinforce and to strengthen in order to accomplish and in order to defend life in our planet.
Looking ahead to the next climate summit in Cancun, are negotiations likely to be more inclusive than those at Copenhagen?
We are very afraid that what we have seen in Copenhagen can repeat in Cancun. That means we are afraid that a document, a paper, drafted by a small group of persons or countries can emerge at the last minute and be presented as an option, or take it or leave it, and if you don't accept it, you're going to be responsible of the failure. So a blackmail of this kind is not acceptable. We have now a text that includes the proposals of all the different states. We need to move forward in the negotiating between all of us. It's not easy, but it's the only way to come to an agreement. Any process of an elite diplomacy that tries to bring a solution from a very small group to the vast majority of states would be a repetition of the failure of Copenhagen.
The Cochabamba People's Agreement calls for an urgent and unifying response to global climate change, while advocating for greater democracy and stakeholder engagement in climate negotiations. The decision to include the Cochabamba recommendations within the negotiating text for the upcoming talks in Cancun appears to represent a positive movement towards a more inclusive negotiation process. Yet, as Ambassador Solón has suggested, realising binding, effectual and inclusive global commitments to combat climate change in Cancun will be a great political challenge. This has been Kate Porter reporting for Global Policy Forum. For information and analysis on this issue and more, please visit our website at www.globalpolicy.org.